And we just got news, ironically enough, which is perfect timing for everybody out there. 56 players have tested positive for COVID-19 since players began reporting to training camp. That's about 2% of the 2,600 players on active NFL rosters and well under a 1% positivity rate in terms of total tests administered. Dr. David Chao joins us now. Perfect timing there at Pro Football Doc. You've been talking about what these numbers would look like. That's a pretty good early read from NFL teams, right?
No, it's a very good early read, and it bodes well. It seems like players have, heeded social distancing during the pandemic prior to coming in. But the number's a little bit deceptive. It is indeed 56 players that tested positive during the reporting, but prior to reporting, whether they felt symptoms or had a reason to report early, there was another 107. So if you want to say the total of the league coming in, that number is actually 163, which is about the 150 to 200 that I've been saying all along would happen by the start of training camp.
All right, how optimistic are you, based on what you have seen from NFL team protocols, at the plan that the NFL is putting in place in order to play a season?
Well, I think the NFL had so many moving pieces. They didn't communicate their plan very well to their own players initially, right? I mean, even beside the tweet storm a few weeks ago where the players were complaining, Odell Beckham even was quoted a few weeks back saying that he's not sure that there's anything in place or that he's comfortable playing. But since he's reported, he sees that everything looks pretty good to him. And I think the NFL, as the plans are revealed, has done a relatively good job so far. And one thing that I will call them out for and cite them for as being positive is the sensors that everyone in the building wears. That's a very proactive approach. For example, you shouldn't be contact tracing after someone is positive and scrambling around. That's very reactive. Proactive is not having players or coaches within 6 feet of each other. Otherwise, a buzzer or a light goes off and then a beep goes off as a reminder to stay away and to stay safe. And being proactive like that is going to be very important. But let's not forget the importance at home and away from the facility, where the NFLPA has agreed that you could go on non-football injury and not get paid if you test positive for COVID if you have been shown to have irresponsible behavior. A pretty bold move by the union to protect the majority of players that probably will be compliant.
Do you expect for there to be very many additional players announcing they're opting out of the NFL season by 4 o'clock Eastern today?
Clay, honestly, I don't know. I mean, I sort of have admitted that there have been more players that have opted out than I thought would already. I didn't think there would be a lot of players opting out. And I've written the article at Outkick explaining why I didn't think so. So I've already underestimated that. I get coronavirus is new and people are worried about their families, newborn children, although that risk seems to be relatively low, at least in San Diego, talking to the head of ICU at the local children's hospital. But I understand the fear, and, I've already underestimated the number of people opting out. Honestly, there's been way more people opting out for coronavirus than has ever opted out for CTE, and that surprised me somewhat.
Yeah, it is kind of interesting in general because football is not a safe sport, and you well know that as a former team physician. And in fact, arguably, the danger to players is much more significant from the game itself than it is off the field from the coronavirus. But I always like to use this as an analogy. We were talking with Shannon Spake earlier. I'm a history nerd. I enjoy studying American history. There's a time and a battle at Chickamauga during the Civil War, and I think this is an interesting analogy to known versus unknown threats and how psychologically sometimes people can behave differently even if it's not a rational behavior. There was a Civil War regiment marching, and they marched over a hornet's nest. And the hornet's nest was, obviously the hornets were furious, and they started to sting all of the soldiers. Those soldiers had not broken ranks, walking literally into hail of gunfire, right? Because back in the day in Civil War, you moved your everybody just, for people who don't know, you walked in a line, sort of Napoleonic style. And if you've watched that old sort of study, like you were all in a line together. They would not break when they were being shot at. Literally, guys are getting hit by cannonballs. They're getting hit by mini balls, by muskets, everything else. They do their job because they have trained for that job, even though it is incredibly dangerous. But when they walked over the hornet's nest and the hornets started to sting them, they all stopped marching together and started running in different directions. So they were behaving in a way that was totally irrational, in that they were walking towards gunfire and doing their job, which they had trained for, but they weren't prepared for the hornet's nest, which offered comparatively much less danger because it was an unexpected danger. And I always find that to be really kind of psychologically amazing to think about, and I think you can apply it to what's going on with the NFL right now. The risk to your body, to your limb, to your health, to your limbs, to your head, certainly with CTE, all these different things are monumental for the NFL, but it's a risk that the players have known and accepted and trained for, and the coronavirus is like the hornet's nest to those Civil War soldiers. Oh my God, that's the one we have to adjust from.
Well, and it is fear of the unknown, but the psychology of fear and really the psychology of injury is a big part of it. The mental side of getting over even an ACL injury is a significant part of what we do in medical staff, as much as the surgery and rehab. So, yeah, I think there's a mental part there, and because of that, I think I underestimated the fear and the number of opt-outs. Look, it's a player's right to opt out. I'm not taking that away from them, but maybe I'm jaded because I'm in the medical profession or I see this. The risk is real. We've talked about COVID. I've written about it. I'm not a COVID denier per se, but I just was surprised still at the number of opt-outs.
We're talking to Dr. David Chao. How important is the precedent now? We know that the NFL is not going to be in a bubble, even if there may be individual teams creating somewhat bubble-like scenarios. Is it for Major League Baseball to, it appears, have fought through the early positives that they have had, and potentially by tomorrow, although who knows, things can change, but right now by tomorrow, all 30 Major League Baseball teams would be back in action, and the season will have never stopped for the vast majority of teams?
Well, bubble, no bubble, the principles have to be the same. And that's trying to stay as safe as possible. Now, when you do it in a bubble and you really enforce it, it gives you a layer of security. But to me, the issue with the bubble is it's an all or none. If there was a Marlins-like outbreak inside the NBA or NHL bubble, it would have shut down the entire league. Now, So far, there have been no positive tests, which is kudos to both of those leagues. But as I watched a little bit of hockey last night, besides the fight that went on, I mean, couldn't you on the side on the benches, instead of sitting right next to each other, make of them 3 rows deep, but still have the same entry at the blue line for substitutions, et cetera? Because if there is a hockey player that's positive, sitting together for several hours on the bench could be a super spreader event. Now, thankfully, they're in a bubble and they haven't had any positives yet, but I would hate to see that change. Now, the NFL and Major League Baseball are not doing a true bubble, but they're doing a virtual bubble inside the facility, and they're trying to do social distancing outside with all the penalties. So it's just a different form. It's still the same principles.
How optimistic are you? Last question. Dr. David Chao, go read him at Outkick. You can listen to him here every week. How optimistic are you that the NFL season will start on September 10th and will be underway with football based on what you're seeing from the NFL so far?
I continue to be optimistic. Clay, if you remember back in March, we talked about that.
Yep.
I was way more optimistic about starting on time than finishing the season. That still stands. And I hope, what the NFL has going for it is, you talk about market timing. They couldn't have had any better market timing. If we all had market timing like this, we all could retire off the stock market. I mean, the pandemic started basically as the football season ended. They had the most time to be ready, and I think they'll take advantage of it.
Outstanding stuff. Anything else we should know as we roll into the weekend from your perspective as it pertains to the coronavirus in sports?
Well, there's been a lot of talk about heart issues, and the Red Sox pitcher that season ended due to heart issues, and people say there's no cure to the myocarditis. There's no question there's no cure to inflammation of the heart. There's no question anytime the heart is involved, people should be very, very worried. But his case was very mild. He was shut down as a precaution because of the timing in the season. And yes, there is no cure to the myocarditis except for time. And the Red Sox do expect a full 100% recovery over time. So it is worrisome. It is scary, but the sky isn't falling on that one.
Outstanding stuff as always. Go read him at Outkick.com. He's Pro Football Doc on Twitter at Pro Football Doc. Dr. David Chao. Appreciate the time, my man.
Thank you.